power, your continued blessings, your mercies, your graces, and your compassion that you continue to bestow upon us, oh Father.
Yes.
We ask now, Lord God, for your Holy Spirit to illumine us, to guide us, oh Father, as we go into your holy word. Bless you, bless those who are here, Father God, and bless those who are not here as well, oh Father. We ask you to bless those who may even be traveling through various places in the country also, Father. We ask now, Father God, that you bless our pastor, bless his wife, continue to bring healing in her body. And I call the names of my dear brother, Sean Holmes and Marcus Bonetto, Lord, that you continue to bring healing to their bodies. Please give the doctors a correct diagnosis, oh Father, so they can determine their ailment, oh Father. And now, great God, we just thank you for your blessings of having a place to come where we can come and study your word in freedom, oh Father God, and without fear from the government, oh Father. Lord, we, as always, we pray for those who are the household of faith who are not as fortunate we are, based upon your divine and providential plan. All these blessings, oh Father, we ask in your Son, Jesus Christ's name. Amen. All right, so we left off last week. I think we were at verse 2, if I recall. I think we finished verse 2, and we'll start in verse 3. We finished verse 2, 1 and 2, and we finished, we kind of like finished those two. So, what brave soul brings us up to speed now in regards to what those two verses are talking about?
I'll go back to for this.
Seven? Yep, chapter 7. Okay.
Let us know just how much more superior, thank you, Father, that Melchizedek is. Am I pronouncing it right?
Melchizedek.
Melchizedek. I don't know why I don't call him Melchizedek. Melchizedek. I get it right. Melchizedek is over Christ is, I'm sorry, over Melchizedek. And talking about his going through his lineage, talking about who he is. He was a king, but he was only a king over, I say, a set amount of people versus Christ. Christ is a king over everybody. Would be king over everybody.
Okay.
If you will. Type thing. I'm stay away from this, all of it. Just try to stay in that little thing, but once you want to go further.
Okay.
Talks about his priesthood. We talk about his priesthood and how he didn't come from the Christ, of course, did not come from the Levites. He's not Aaron, come out of the lineage of Aaron, which most priests do, or most priests, all priests did at that time, had to come out there. But it says that you didn't have to be. He's a much more superior priest because he didn't have to be follow the lineage of Aaron.
Okay.
Did he have a lineage? I mean, Melchizedek?
He did. Okay, continue if you.
Yeah.
You have a question, and we're going to get into that's today's lesson about lineage.
Okay, because I know to be a priest, those back in that day, those priests died. Whereas Melchizedek did not die. And, you know, and when I asked about the lineage, it's because they don't say about but he's not a neighbor. I did know that. That's one thing that stuck with me. He is a man. And Melchizedek was foreshadow or the shadow type of Christ. Whereas Christ can take away all our sins, whereas Melchizedek was not here.
Right. So both of you are on the right track. So let's make sure that we are clear.
Okay.
Okay, because that's again, unfortunately, that's more important to me than and the only reason why I always ask this so that I can see where you're at, so I can know where I need to go.
Okay.
So again, we said before now that chapter 7 takes up from chapter 5, verse 11, where the writer has said what? Of whom we have much to say. In other words, we have a lot to talk about. But in your present spiritual state, I can't quite do that yet. I've got to, in other words, I've got to do some other things to get you ready because, and we know how this goes. Whenever there is any kind of difficult teaching or doctrine, we would much prefer to do what? Just pass on it. Let's not spend a lot of time on that because I don't have time to try to do what? To try to think and understand what you're saying. And that's the whole point behind chapter 5:12 through chapter 6, verse 19, is that the writer has got to get them to that point of now being in a mental state to be able to do what? To receive the additional information about who Melchizedek is. So, as Sister Jones was pointing out, Melchizedek is a type, okay, of Christ. And we said before, a type is given in the Old Testament, and its reality always is found in where? The New Testament. So therefore, in order to understand who Christ is as it relates to his priesthood, because remember now, Jesus did not talk about his priesthood, nor did any of the other apostles talk about his priesthood. So therefore, the idea now of the priesthood of Jesus is something that is altogether new. Why? Because no one has, up to this point in time, no one has what? Has talked about it. So that's why he says, of whom we have much to talk about, because you wouldn't know about this order because it has not been talked about up until this point. So then we said that when you talk about type, the type has got to always, okay, point to the reality, right?
Yeah.
But they got to correspond. In other words, you can't have, and we said before now that they got to be parallel. Exactly right. So we said before now, on this side of the board, you have type, right? Yeah. And we, of course, also said you have shadows as well, shadows and types. They both point to the New Testament. So we said on the when it comes to the New Testament, what do we call the reality of the type? What's that name I gave you? Don't you guys have a notebook that we gave you? The type. That's it. So this is the anti-type. So in other words, we're saying what? That the type must correspond to the anti-type. In other words, if I'm going to understand the anti-type, the type has got to be what? Accurate. So if we're not talking about, because remember now, we talked about a contrast between who now? Melchizedek and who?
Christ.
No.
I'm sorry, the older priest.
Who is he? Aaron. So now we're talking about the contrast between the Aaronic priesthood, Aaron, and the priesthood that Melchizedek came out of. So the point that the writer is trying to do is what? He's trying to point to the fact that the priesthood of Melchizedek, as Sister Jones said, is what? Is much, much more superior than that of Aaron. Why? Because Melchizedek was what? A king, right? Correct?
Yes, he was.
And he was a priest. And then we said before that all these things he had the authority to do all these things because he was a servant of the Most High God. And we said on last week now, what is the difference now between the Most High God? Because remember now, Aaron was a priest of God. We said before now that the names are what we're looking at. The name that we know relates to the Hebrew people is the name Jehovah. Correct? Are we there? Okay. But this particular name for God, and it's in Dr. MacArthur brings that point out on page 175, second paragraph, where he gives him, third paragraph, El Elyon. Okay? And we said on last week, what's the difference between those two names? El Elyon means what? The God of what?
Universe.
Universe. In other words, this is talking about God as being the universe, U-N-I-V-E-R-S-A-M, the universal God, correct? Whereas when you talk about Jehovah, you're talking about the God of who? The nation of Israel. In other words, Jehovah is the God of the Israelites. He's the relationship. He's the covenant God. So therefore, you will always find, or you will always see Jehovah when it's related to, again, now who? The priest. So again, now you can already see now the comparison and the superiority now between Aaron and Melchizedek, just by looking at one word. In other words, he was a king. We already know now that Aaron was not a king, right? We know that Aaron was a priest,
right?
So what's the big deal?
He was not a priest of the Most High.
Exactly right. He was only a priest. His priesthood was given to him by.
And the served only a certain amount of time. Well, most priests out of there could serve only a certain amount of time.
Again, another very important point. The Aaronic priesthood, they served for what? From 25 to 50, and that was it. Okay? But as we go into the lesson today, we find out now that Melchizedek had what we refer to as an eternal priesthood. And we will look at that.
Right.
Just keep it in the back of your mind,
Right.
because we need to understand what that actually means. So we see right away now that the name of God again emphasized Melchizedek's superiority, because he served again, and we want to be careful here. We're not saying now that they serve two different gods.
Right. No.
We're not saying that.
No.
What we're saying is that the authority, because remember now, that the only intermediary between God and man is who?
The priest.
The priest. Okay? So therefore, because of the nature of Aaron's priesthood, you already see the superiority, because what? Aaron could only intercede for the people of who? Of Israel. On the other hand, Melchizedek could intercede on behalf of who? Anybody. That's why Abraham was able to go to it. So therefore, you see now you have a very clear picture now of the writer's defense in regards to now why Jesus Christ is much more superior, because we emphasized again on last week that Aaron, right, and then you had Melchizedek. We said what now? That Jesus was after, right, the order, or after the priesthood of Melchizedek.
Right.
And then we said before that when you talk about Aaron, you talk about those who are his. In other words, you're talking about those who came off that order, and because they was off that order, they were what? They were limited by those things which characterize. Now I want you to stop me, because I don't want you to have to answer this question again next week. And you ought to keep me. So you see, right?
Right.
He's off the priesthood of Aaron. So therefore, all those who came out of the Aaronic priesthood were actually controlled by those things which characterize Aaron. In other words, they what? They had a limited time.
Right.
They could only serve certain people. Right. So you can see now that this was the big difference. But the idea about being after is not so much that you're part of him, but the word after has the idea about what? This parallel that you said before. In other words, it's more like what? Jesus Christ was after the what? The pattern of Melchizedek.
Okay.
He didn't come from Melchizedek.
Right.
But the pattern of Melchizedek's priesthood is what? Is parallel to the priesthood of Christ. And Robert said now that we know that because he was what? He was a king type. He was a king, right? Of Salem, which is who? Which is what city? Jerusalem. So again, we know now that Christ is in the millennial reign. He will be what? King of Jerusalem. In other words, he is the promised king that will sit upon David's throne. But not only that, we also know that what? That Jerusalem is the seat of what? The church. So you can see now all this is lining up now. In other words, the type now is what? Is lining up now perfectly with the anti-type. Okay? But then we read about that he was the king of peace of righteousness and peace. Right. Again, emphasize the fact that because of what Christ did, remember now, the anti-type, because of what he did here, they draw a cross. That rugged cross upon that mountain. When 2 Corinthians chapter 5 says what? Go there real quickly. 2 Corinthians chapter 5. Are you there? As time slips away from us.
I'm here.
2 Corinthians chapter 5. And read someone. Okay, someone read verse 18.
And all things are of God, who has reconciled us unto himself by Jesus Christ.
Okay, so that's good. So you see what's going on, right? The anti-type is what? Because of what he did,
reconciled us back to God.
Exactly right. So you have man on one side, you have God on the other side. So understand now what Christ was doing on that cross.
Right.
So Paul is saying what? That on the cross, God was what? Was reconciling. He was in essence doing what? Bringing man back in line with him. And in other words, because of what Christ did, we now have what? We now have been what? Made righteous. I-G-H-T-E-O-U-S. We have been made righteous by the works of Christ based upon what? Faith. In other words, our faith in the works of Christ has made us righteous before God. We have now become right with God. And since we were enemies before, and because of what Christ has done upon the cross, those who were once what? Enemies, this is chapter 5, again, those of us who were once enemies have been what? We've been reconciled now back to God, and now we are no longer enemies. We are sons and daughters. We are friends of God. So therefore, you have first, and I want you to see the order here. Righteousness was always come first. Why? Because you got to be right with God. You can't be his enemy and be at peace with him. So we are, because we have been made righteous by Christ, the blood of Christ, we now have what? Peace with him.
Yes.
And as they say in the old country, now that we have peace with him, that means that we have the peace of God within. Yes. So you can see now that, again, the type pictured that, because he was what? He was the king of righteousness. He was also king of peace. Just like what? Just like the anti-type. And again, we said before last week, the type sometimes does not give you the clear picture. You got to work with it. Okay. But in either case, once you finish working with it, it's got to what? it's got to agree with the anti-type. If it doesn't,
It's not a type in the first place.
well, it's either that or you have misinterpreted the type. Okay? So you have here, so now we have this portion. So that brings us down to, I think that's the end of our review, I believe, isn't it? Because that definitely brings, so let's turn back now to our lesson on Hebrews 7. Hebrews 7 chapter, let's just make sure we cover everything. No, we're on Hebrews chapter 7. And we are, this is page 177 of Dr. MacArthur. And then, of course, we also, I think we closed our last week by saying that Abraham gave him a tenth part of everything. He is first by translation of his name. And then, of course, talk about king of righteousness, and then he is the king, also king of Salem. That is king of peace. And then, of course, that brings us to verse 3. And I think we covered the idea about tithing. We will come to that again later on in the chapter. And I think we did cover the gist of what we were talking about. So now we come into in chapter 7, we now come to verse 3. That troublesome passage, that difficult verse, which I must say, by the way, we have made difficult because we have, again, remember what I told you before, you got to keep things linked up. Okay? Do not break the chain, because once you break the chain, you're going to go off the track and go to what? The wrong interpretation. So what are we talking about now? We're talking about who? Melchizedek. And we're talking about what else? About what is it about Melchizedek are we talking about?
Well, right now, we're going to fact that,
No. What are we talking about thus far? Remember what I told you before. You got to.
It's a type of Christ.
Right?
It's a type pointing toward Christ.
Okay? So that means that whatever we're talking about as the chapter unfolds, has got to remain in that box, so to speak.
Yes.
In other words, it's got to remain in that same context, in the comparison, in regards to what? Why is Melchizedek more superior than Aaron? Okay, we already know now that he was what? A king? Okay, we also know that he was a priest after the Most High God. Okay, so we've gotten that part. Then we found out that Abraham gave him a tenth of all that he had conquered. So, or captured, I should say. So that's the road that we're on. So now we don't want to what? We don't want to leave that road, because if you leave that road, you're gonna ask these kind of questions. Was Melchizedek an angel, or was he Christophany? You won't ask that. You won't ask that question if you stay on track, because we're talking about a man here. Okay? And you know that he's a man, because how does verse 3 start off?
Without father, without mother, without genealogy.
And this is where the problem comes. Because right now,
Tell me you're a man, but then you tell me you got no mom and daddy.
because right now, the question becomes, if he has no mother, if he has no father, then he's got to be Jesus.
All right.
Because Jesus is the only, although that's not even true, because what? Jesus did have a mother and father. So you can't even, so you can't even make that leap. Okay? So again, let's back up. Get our minds on the same path. We are what? We are comparing the superiority of Melchizedek's priesthood to that of Aaron. So the first thing that we already have done is what? We've already said now that we're talking about what? A pattern.
Yes,
In other words, he is a type.
Right.
So this is so we're comparing a pattern,
Yes.
okay, of how this priest, Melchizedek, is an accurate picture.
Yes.
Remember back in the old days we had those cameras, those Polaroid cameras?
Yes.
where you would pull out the negative thing, and you could see you could see figures, whatever. But you couldn't really tell who was in the picture. That's a type. Okay, so we have this parallel. We're still working on this parallel. The type TYP. And then, of course, we have the shadow. We'll put the anti-type here. All right? And TYP. So, the next thing we learn about this type here is what? He is without what?
Mother, father.
Now, here is the question. I want you to say.
I got you.
Mother or father. Why? Again, remember now, we're talking about a contrast now.
Right.
So why would this even be there?
Because all other priests had to come from the Levites. They had come from the family of Aaron. True. Levites.
True.
So he didn't come from there.
But why talk about my mother and my father? In other words, why bring my mother and my father into this business? They ain't got no business here. Why you want to bring him into the picture now? We're talking about priests. Why? Huh? Say what? See, that's what I want you to see.
Right.
See, and Sister Stella was on the track. When you read about any priest, or any Jewish person, really, you will always find them being what? As a matter of fact, go to Matthew chapter 1, real quickly, just to give you an example. And then I want you to turn to Dr. MacArthur's book on page number 177, where we're supposed to get in the first place. Matthew chapter 1, who has it? Start reading at verse 1.
The book of the generations of Jesus Christ. From David, the son of Abraham. Abraham begat Isaac, and Isaac begat Jacob.
Just stop right there.
I know.
So, the word genealogy in the Bible, it literally means the record of, or the history of. So, when it comes to the Jewish nation, or the Jew, especially talking about kings and priests and those kind of things, you will always have, in essence, the record.
Yes.
When you go to the book of Genesis, for example, every time a major character comes on the stage, you will have what? A genealogy of that particular person, Abraham. Okay? Noah. Adam even. Okay? In other words, you will have what? This is the account. This is the record. So we can trace back now where these people come from.
Right.
So they don't normally list the mother, but the point is that the idea here is what? Is that when it comes to Aaron, you can trace back. You can trace back. The Bible gives you the name of his father. Okay, so you can, in other words, you can now say, okay, I know where he started from. I have his origin.
Right.
And you can keep on going down the line to all of the other priests that came from Aaron. But now when you come to Melchizedek, you don't see nothing. All you do is in Genesis chapter 14, verses 18 and 19, all you do is he just pops up on the scene out of nowhere. In other words, this is Melchizedek. Abraham met Melchizedek, who was the son of blah, blah, blah. No. All you see is he met Melchizedek, period. So from that standpoint, Melchizedek doesn't have, follow me now, it would appear now that Melchizedek did not have mother or father, although we know he did.
Right.
How do you know that, by the way? Because it's a man. In other words, if you are a man, you got to have come from somewhere. What was the point of not including mother or father here in the Bible? What was the point? Say what? The contrast. What did we say before? If this is going to match this, you can't bring in now a mother and a father, although he had one, because what? We're not so much concerned about the man. Follow me now. In other words, Melchizedek is important because of the contrast, but we're not so concerned about him. We are more concerned about what? The nature of his what? Priesthood. Because we're doing what? We are comparing his priesthood to that of Aaron. So therefore, from that standpoint, when you leave off, when this part is left off, you now have the idea of someone who is in essence always what? Always here. And, follow me now, he could still be here now. Why? Because what does the next part of the verse say? Without mother, without father, without what? Turn back to Hebrews.
Without genealogy, having neither
Beginning of days, or end of life.
See? Everybody else,
And that,
blah, 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 lived 200 years and he died. So-and-so lived 150 days, 150 years and he died. Look at the be with the Father. Enoch walked with God, and he was what? He was not. So the Bible always does what? It always gives the beginning when you was born, who you came from, and then when you die. So there is no, you have the gap, but you have the bookends to hold the gap together, so to speak. But Melchizedek, you don't know when he was born. In other words, not only does he not have a mother or father listed, again, keyword, recorded, the writer says what? No genealogy, and that right there should give you a hint that all they're saying is that there is no genealogy recorded, period.
yes.
So that what? So that the type can remain true to the anti-type.
Right.
No mother, no father, no genealogy, no beginning or ending of time. What's the next part of the verse say? What the next verse say?
But made light unto the Son of God.
Now stop right there. Notice now how he identifies, the writer talking about, how he identifies Jesus here. He doesn't call him Jesus.
Right.
And I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to kind of think about it for a second. Why do you think that he didn't say likened unto Jesus?
Because they don't know Jesus. I'm trying to sell you on Jesus. But
You know, they know Jesus. Remember we already read.
So it's all about God.
Well, it's all about, no. It's all about Jesus. Remember, this is all about Christ.
Yeah, but for them, they still be trying to sell them.
No. Go to Hebrews 10 again. We got it. I want to, like I said, I got to keep getting the Bible. I want to get out.
Okay.
Go to Hebrews 10 again.
I'm here.
Read chapter 10. Okay, go to chapter 10. Read verses 34, 35.
Way up.
There. Read, please.
Quench the violence of fire. Escape the edge of the sword. Out of the weakness were made strong. Wax valiant in fight. Turn to.
That's Hebrews 10.
No, I'm on that. I'm sorry.
I'm getting ready to say, do I have a wrong with my Bible wrong or what?
10 and what?
34, 35.
Somebody else read it.
Somebody read.
For ye had compassion of me in my bonds, and took joyfully the spoiling of your goods, knowing in yourselves that ye have in heaven a better and enduring substance. verse 35. Cast not away, therefore, your confidence, which hath great recompense of reward.
Now, who is he talking to? I mean, who is he talking about in those verses? No. Read verse 33 as well.
Partly whilst ye were made a gazing stock, both by reproaches and afflictions, and partly whilst ye became companions of them that were so used.
Read the verse before that.
The call to remembrance the former days, in which, after ye were illuminated, he endured a great fight of affliction.
Okay, so now who is he talking to?
Of these Jews that
So, but who is he talking to? Believers. What believers? He's talking to the same people, and he's talking to right now. What has happened? In other words, I want you to keep your mind focused on who we're talking about. Remember what I told you before. Whenever you read a book in the Bible, you got to always remember the audience and the context and the what and the purpose for the writing of the book itself. So the audience here is what? Is the Hebrew believers who have begun to, in essence, backslide because of what? Because of what? Persecution. So again, Hebrews 10 reminds us that these believers, they were what? They were very strong at first. So much so that they had become spectacles before people. Because of what? Because of their faith. But now they were beginning, because persecution was what? Was coming, what was really coming down kind of hard on them. They were getting ready to, they were saying, wait a minute, wait. Maybe this Christianity is not what it was made up to be. So the writer has been all this time, since chapter 1, he's been trying to explain to them why they are on the right track by doing what? By emphasizing the superiority of their faith by doing what? By emphasizing the superiority of who? The leader of your faith, which is Jesus Christ. Which means that if the leader is superior, that means that whatever he is the leader of is obviously what? Superior.
you said that believing Hebrews? I thought it was believing Jews.
Hebrew Jews.
Oh,
That's another name.
Oh, okay.
Well, you sound wrong. I said you believe in Jews.
I did say it? Well,
Yeah.
That's why I was confused.
Yeah.
I didn't hear that part.
Okay.
I apologize. Please accept. If you remember, the Lord said 7 times. Seven times 7. Remember 7 times 7. 70 times 7.
That's right.
Okay, so we understand now that he's talking to these Jewish believers, these Hebrew believers. He's what? He's building a case now.
Right.
Why Jesus is what? What did we say before? Christ is much better than the old way.
Right.
Okay? So now he's moving along, and now we are, right now we should have a clear understanding now. If you don't, I need you to ask me questions. We should have a clear understanding now of why Jesus is better. But I'm going back to my original question now. Why did he not use the word Jesus? In other words, why didn't he say that Melchizedek was likened? Because the word is really not like, but it's actually in the Greek translation it's translated as likened. Okay. So why didn't he use the term he was made like Jesus? Because remember now, Jesus is what? He is the antitype. We talk about the antitype. Say what?
Because of his audience that he's talking to.
Explain.
Well, that's the way they address, what they understood.
Understood.
Go back in the Old Testament. Under God.
Oh, it's talking to you. Come on.
It's like Matthew is dealing with the Hebrews. son of man.
Right?
Because he's dealing with broader order.
So why did they say son of man here?
But through his ordinance. Dealing with his believers. Hebrews.
You get there.
Left me alone.
Your classmates are leaving you alone. No, they live out there. Remember we said before that what? He is what? He's still what? No matter how you categorize Melchizedek, he will always be what? A human. So let's put man here, because that's who he is. He's the antitype, okay? I'm sorry, he's the type of Christ.
Right.
All right? Now, as you read verses 1 and verse 2, you cannot, follow me now, you cannot unlink verse 1 and 2 from verse 3. In other words, 1, 2, and 3, they are what? They are one unit. Look at it. Let me use another illustration. They are one link in the chain.
Okay.
All right? So you can't break that chain and remain, and your chain remains integrous. So if you do it from that standpoint, the liken unto is based upon what he just said. Correct? So if he said, if he's already said now that the man had no mother or father, he had no beginning, no ending, right? He had no genealogy. How can that relate to the types? And that means it's already antitype. Because the antitype would have been who? Oh, no. The antitype would have been Jesus. Who himself was what? Who did have what? Who did have a beginning. Correct? Because you know he died at 33 years old. You know he had what? A genealogy. Why? Because Matthew tells you that. Luke tells you that. So, James is on the right path. Here, in other words, verses 1 and 2 can never refer to what? Verses 1 and 2 can never refer. I'm sorry, not verses 1 and 2. Verses 2 can never refer to what? To what? No. But it has to refer to Jesus. No, not Christopher. Get Christopher down to mind. In other words, verse 2. Well, not verse 2. Verse 2 can never refer to a. In other words, you could never apply verse 2 to any human. Right? Did I lose you guys?
Yeah.
You talking about verse 3.
I'm talking about.
3.
Also, Abraham did a 10-pound off first being
I'm still talking on verse 2. I'm sorry, I phrased the question wrong. The first part of verse 2 could never apply to a human. Correct? Do I agree with that? Without mother, without father? Right. No beginning, no ending? That's verse 2. Sorry. Okay. Sorry. Verse 3, the first part of verse 3 could never apply to what? A human. Right? Because all of us have a mother and a father. As a matter of fact, Dr. MacArthur brings that point out, that the only place this word is even used is here.
Right.
Because any other place, it wouldn't make any sense.
Right.
Because everybody has a mother or father.
Right.
So therefore now, we say now that the first part of verse 3, we'll put 3a here, okay, can never apply to a human, and this is why Jay was on the right page.
Right.
So therefore, what does he do? He says what? He says he was likened unto the Son of God.
Right. And he did not also.
Why? Remember what I told you before? Do not separate these verses.
Without father.
Without mother, without beginning, without end, no genealogy.
Right.
That is the picture of the Son of God.
Right.
Right? The Son of God has no beginning because he's what? He's eternal.
Right.
He has no mother or father because he is begotten of the Father.
Right.
He has no genealogy because there is no one that was before him, and he didn't come from anybody.
Amen.
So you can see now that here the type actually now becomes the type of the ARCH of the archetype. What's an archetype, by the way? What's the archetype mean? Arch always means what? The chief. In other words, the one who is above everything. So the reality is that although he was a picture of the archetype, in other words, the Son of God, he still pointed to Jesus as being what? Our high priest, because Jesus and the Son of God is what? Is what? Is what?
Right.
So so we're talking about Jesus and what? In his priestly office. So now you can say what? That in his priestly office, he was the Son of God, but he was also Jesus. But he's also our high priest now, who had no mother, had no father, had no beginning, had no end. And then and that's why at the end of the verse 3, what does the writer say about Melchizedek?
Abiding the priest
Continuously. Again, he's talking now about who? Is he talking now about Jesus or he's talking about Melchizedek?
Well, Melchizedek.
Huh?
Melchizedek.
Okay. Again, if you keep everything together, you won't get lost. He's still talking about Melchizedek.
Right.
So he's saying now, follow me now, because I got a question. He's saying now that the priesthood of Melchizedek, because remember now, it's got to correspond to the antitype.
Right.
So he's saying now that the priesthood of Melchizedek is continuously. It's continuous, meaning that it hasn't ended. Why does he say that? So Melchizedek never died?
No.
What did he say?
You have a record.
That's the point. Because what are we saying? These two have got to match. So therefore, the Bible there is no record, Bible or any other historical record, of not only when he was born, but there was no record of whenever his priesthood started, and there was no indication of when his priesthood ended. So as far as we know, he's still going on. In other words, he's still out there somewhere being a high priest or somebody. Although we know that's not true, of course.
Right.
Well, we're doing what? We're comparing, okay, the records of these two men. Two men being who? Aaron, Melchizedek. Aaron, you can trace his term in office. So you already know that Aaron died. So you know that once he died, it didn't matter about anything else. Everything ceased.
Right.
But there is no record. The same way as what? The same way as there is no record of his mother or his father, there is no record of him being born, and there is no record of his genealogy. All those things are what? God, by the way, intentionally left out so that what? So that the type could properly correspond to the antitype. So when you read Melchizedek and you read this chapter in Hebrews, you now all of a sudden now can take Old Testament and now what? Lock it in the New Testament truth. In other words, you can now take, as the pastor would say, you can now take what? The physical picture, the negative you just got out of the Polaroid camera, and you can develop it. In other words, now you can see the picture. You didn't have it. In other words, all you had that here was the negative, which in essence was always pointing to the picture. But see, you couldn't see that. The Hebrews couldn't see that. Go to 1 Peter real quickly. Go to 1 Peter 1. And you all know this verse. but we're gonna go there because, we just need to tie some strings up.
Okay.
1 Peter 1. Now, someone read, where do I want to start? Let's start at verse number. Well, because of time, let's start at verse 8. Somebody, quickly, time is going.
Though you have not seen him, you love him.
Christ. Continue.
Though you do not see him, you believe in him.
Continue. Christ.
And rejoice with joy that is inexpressible and filled with glory. Obtaining the outcome of your faith, the salvation of your souls.
Continue.
Concerning this salvation, the prophet prophesied about the grace that was to be yours, searched and inquired carefully, inquiring what person or time the Spirit of Christ in them was indicated when he predicted the suffering of Christ and the subsequent glory. It was revealed to them that they were serving not themselves but you in the things that you have now announced to you, those who preach the good news to you by the Holy Spirit sent from heaven, things into which angels long to look.
Okay. Do you see what's going on there? In other words, God gives us all this stuff in the Old Testament. And while the prophets now, get this now, the prophets now, they're speaking all this stuff. But they have no idea what they're saying, why they're saying, and sometimes not even who it's about. Peter said, now, this is for you. But see, you couldn't. You couldn't do anything with it because it was what? It was a negative. I mean, you can see that every year when they sacrifice a lamb, it was pointing to God's salvation of his people, but you scratch your head and you wonder, how? You can see every year they would leave this gate, go out of the camp, away from the tabernacle, and he will be led out into the wilderness where he could never get back again, or never find his way back again to the tabernacle where the presence of God was. But why? And then, don't miss this out. Peter says, even the angels, they're wondering, what is God doing? What is going on here? But it's always done for what? For us. And now, as we learn, we begin now to understand the magnificence and the glory of God. As he what? As he condescends down to us. In other words, if there is no picture, how am I going to understand the spiritual stuff? God says, I'm going to condescend. I'm going to give you some pictures. So when the spiritual come on the scene, you can understand what I have done for you. And now, you should have no problems serving me. This is why, my brothers and sisters, study is so important.
Amen.
And this is my joy, by the way.
Okay.
To unfold these truths, because I get such a joy because I know the Lord has given me this tremendous gift.
Amen.
And I hope that you have gotten that. I mean, I tried. And if you have any questions, please ask.
Well, we're going to start the class off with any questions.
That's right. Okay. We didn't. Okay, so I'm going to try to send this link again. Hopefully you should have to be able to do. I think, did you get it, James?
Yeah, I got it. I sent it. Telling you I got it, but then something came back saying, I don't know if you got it or not.
Oh, I got your email saying that you got it.
Okay.
But like I told my sister, I got it.
And I was able to open it too.
I was able to open the first one, but there was the class from last year. I didn't have that. It was in your email.